my hair is extra big. All right, well, here we are. What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Today, I thought it would be fun to dive into the nuts and bolts of preparing for a therapy session. It feels like it's in that category of like stuff all of us do as a therapist, but like we don't necessarily intentionally talk about very often. If you've been following my stuff for any amount of time, I don't think it's any secret that I can lean anxious in general, and that definitely in my earlier days, I was so anxious. I was so anxious about everything, and preparing for therapy sessions was no exception. Like that was just like prime breeding ground for Marie's anxiety to manifest. I definitely don't see these as like prescriptive steps, like you should do it the same way as me. It's obviously going to vary depending on the kind of workplace you're in, the type of person you're working with, the type of therapeutic modality, orientation, etc. that you might be utilizing. But I think there's some little takeaways in here that could be relevant to people in different settings, even if it's not like an exact mapping of using the exact same steps to prepare. The biggest shift that I've made from my earlier overly anxious days is learning to embrace the space of not knowing. There's a certain sense of confidence of like, I know enough to carry on with wherever we're going, but being okay with accepting that there's a whole bunch of stuff that I don't know, and letting that just be true has freed me up to be so much more present to my clients. Just know it's okay to not know stuff. Like that's totally normal. You can't know everything. You just can't. All right, so let's get into the practical steps of like how I actually prepare for sessions. I start preparing for a session during the session prior. So obviously, if this is like your initial intake assessment, this doesn't apply. But let's say you're on session 5 with somebody, then I'm going to start preparing for session 5 while I'm still in session 4. So as I reflect on how I prepare for session, the first step in this example would be during session 4, I would take some notes. I just jot down a few key notes that are primarily focused on the content of what we focused on, as well as a little bit of the process or the dynamics that were coming up for the client, like if there's a theme or something like that. So if let's say I'm working with a client and during session number 4, they spent most of the session grieving the loss of a loved one, then on my notes, I might just say something like grieving the loss of so-and-so. And if applicable, if there's like a quick quote that sort of captures what it feels like for that client or the essence of what we're processing, then I might put a quote. Like maybe if there's a quote that sounds something like, quote, I feel so empty without them here. I might just write that quote, and then that's something that then reminds me like this is what it feels like to be in this client's shoes during session 4. I'm going to remember that as I go into session 5. And of course, if we reference any kind of metrics, like let's say they shared their SUD score or something like that, I'll make note of that as well. And along the same lines of preparing for a session starting during the session prior, as soon as the session ends with a client, I immediately sit down with my notebook and jot down 1 or 2 notes about whatever interventions we might have utilized and a bullet point of a direction we might take the next time we meet, assuming there isn't something kind of significant that comes up that is worth sort of interrupting the path that we were on. So anything that needs to be flagged will have gotten caught in this moment of like, oh yeah, Marie, you kind of need to follow up on this. And if nothing got flagged, then I don't really need to think about that client between sessions. So that leads to the next step where if something did get flagged during the end of me jotting down my little notes during the end of the prior session, then between sessions, I can follow up on anything that got flagged. If there's like a new presenting issue or a question diagnostically, then I need to circle back to, what are the diagnostic criteria of that thing? Or maybe I'm feeling like I'm dealing with something that came up for me between, because of that session. And if there aren't any flags, then I don't need to do anything about that client between sessions. I can just carry on, focus on other things, whatever other things are more important right now. The next step for me in preparing for the session does involve showing up early for the session, really to focus on more kind of self-care and mental preparation. Maybe I'll make myself a cup of coffee. I usually put my makeup on in the office. It's sort of like more time that I can spend in my office, the more transition runway I have to exit kind of the busy chaos of like the rest of my life and enter into this space that I'm about to share with my clients. Now, of course, I work in an office separate from my home, but I think if I were seeing clients virtually from home, I would love to have a really similar routine of like how I create some kind of boundary or separation between myself and my children or my life as a mom and all of that stuff. I've made some videos before about kind of creating this sacred space before sessions, so I will link to some of those below. Then at this point, once I'm sufficiently like recentered, my mind has slowed down, then I set aside 5 minutes of final prep before my session, and then an additional 5 minutes per client that I'm about to see. And for this clinical prep work, it's usually pretty minimal. Usually I will just reopen my process notes and reread those bullet points that I wrote at the end of the last session. I will open up a notebook page for each therapy session, and at the top of the notebook page, I put whatever relevant admin items apply. And then underneath that little admin section, I will jot down like 1 or 2 lines in reference to whatever I jotted down last time in our session. And that really just acts as a reminder to me. I can quickly, like in 30 seconds, just reread that right at the top of the page. Or if I truly get like lost at some point in the session, I'm thinking, what were we focused on? It's just right there at the top. Here's where we left off and where we're headed. And so it's a shorthand for me to just kind of be reminded of what we're doing and what we had planned on doing next. I definitely make sure there's at least 5 minutes remaining before the session starts to just do kind of logistical tidy ups. Like literally if there's any clutter around, then I tidy it up. Things like, making sure my phone is set to do not disturb and it's on silent and I have it face down, whether I'm meeting virtually or in person. If I'm meeting virtually, I make sure I have the appropriate windows open on my screen. It's usually like my schedule and my secure online video platform, or if I'm seeing clients in person, then I make sure I have my little side table next to my chair set up. And then of course, I make sure I have time to use the restroom. That's an important part of my preparation. And that about sums up how I prepare for sessions. At this point, the session starts, and I do have an episode all about kind of those first few minutes of the therapy session. So if that's something you'd like to kind of continue on into, I'll link to that episode below. This is just how I go about things, how I've shifted my preparations for sessions over time in a way that fits me. It's gonna look different from place to place. I've de-emphasized like the pressure that I used to put on myself that for my clients to have some like epic aha moment or breakthrough moment every single session. I think that creates an unrealistic, unnecessary pressure. And I also think that like real progress and real change doesn't tend to come from a series of like epic breakthroughs. There may be a sprinkling of breakthroughs here and there, but most progress comes from these like slight little adjustments and then rehearsing a new way of thinking over and over again, or looking at something from a different perspective, just a little bit different this time than we did last time, and making these sort of more marginal, small shifts, almost unnoticeable shifts. But then if you look at the arc of treatment over time, over let's say the last 5 sessions, have we seen some shifts in this person's perspective? Or over the arc of our work together, can we see them progressing towards their treatment goals? How do you prepare for your sessions? What are some of the things that you found really helpful? And feel free to leave them in the comments below, because I always love when you all share your tips, because I'm just me. And it's helpful to hear from all of you as well. And before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring this video. TherapyNotes helps with all of your practice management needs, from scheduling to notes to billing. They have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform and a whole suite of AI features to streamline your note-taking process. If you'd like to check out TherapyNotes, including their whole suite of AI features, you can check it out for free for 2 months with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Well, thanks for joining me in this episode. I hope it was helpful. Sometimes the things that I'm curious about, I'm like, does this matter? These are things that I think about though, so hopefully some of you are interested and you can get your juices flowing, right? What are the things that help you prepare for session? Is there anything that's working well for you, or is there anything that you'd like to try a little bit differently to make it easier for you and your clients? And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.